coffee in here, sorry.
No worries. We'll let you come on in when you're done making coffee. No problem. Well, I wasn't sure if anybody was going to show up tonight, so I brought my crew with me. Well, we are at week 4, so this is 2/3 of the way through this class. I asked this last week, but most of us weren't here last week. So as you've been thinking on issues of justice that maybe capture your attention or your action plan, is there anything anybody's noticing, learning, discovered, anything you'd like to tell us about before we jump into tonight's lesson?
Today's World Water Day.
Today is World Water Day. Nice job paying attention.
Oh man, I should have water.
Lainey shared with her
What'd you make your coffee?
group this morning some facts associated with World Water Day.
Yes.
I was just on the World Water Day website today. Matt Damon was talking, which may be what you shared. Every 21 seconds, a child dies somewhere in the world because of lack of sanitation or water.
Yeah, Lainey put some interesting.
Used to be 15.
Water.org. And
Every 21 seconds.
every 21 seconds, they think that a child dies due to lack of clean water or sanitation.
Yeah, Lainey had a number of facts she was sharing.
What did you just say about 15?
It used to be 15, but like
The number's actually getting
2004,
better.
it was 15 every 15 seconds, but
So that
it's gotten better.
No, they're making
Yep.
progress, I think is what
Yeah.
we're seeing, yeah. 780 million people have zero access to clean water, 2.5 times the population of the United States. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy. Well, just a little bit of review as we jump in tonight. We've talked about this biblical idea of shalom. What is shalom? Peace, right. Hebrew word for peace that kind of digs a little bit deeper to a completeness and a wholeness. The goal of God's kingdom is completeness and wholeness. And so we've talked about how biblical justice is kind of the ground floor for shalom, that we can't have that without justice. And so it's that restoration of wholeness. And then we talked about, in our second week, we've talked about advocacy, that work to change the structures. And we talked about some of the different ways that you can go about that. Did anybody, have you been working on your action plan? Has anybody got a plan for advocacy at all yet? Anybody tweet their senators? Okay. And then last week, there were just a couple of us here. I know going into spring break, it was kind of a busy week for people, but we talked about prayer and how some of these problems that we look at can seem so very overwhelming that you just can't even begin to know really where to begin, and you can just kind of want to walk away from it. But when we pray fervently for these big things, that it changes our hearts. And we spent some time together praying for those who are oppressed and those who are in power, and talking about how that's part of restoring justice. So I'd like to jump right in tonight to Jeremiah 22, if you have your Bibles with you. We're just going to focus on, I will say, for those of you who are taking like 3 classes right now, I would just like to point out that my homework was by far your shortest assignment.
And we appreciate it.
Jeremiah 22, we're going to read 11 through 17. If I have somebody who wants to read that, you can jump right in and start reading. If not, I'll read it.
I got it.
Okay?
But this is what the Lord says about Shallum, son of Josiah, who succeeded his father as king of Judah, but has gone from this place. He will never return. He will die in the place where they have led him captive. He will not see this land again. Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his countrymen work for nothing, not paying them for their labor. He says, I will build myself a great palace with spacious upper rooms. So he makes large windows in it, panels it with cedar, and decorates it in red. Does it make you a king to have more and more cedar? Did not your father have food and drink? He did what was right and just, so all went well with him. He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord? But your eyes and your heart are set only on dishonest gain, on shedding innocent blood, and on oppression and extortion.
Okay, so we have God speaking to a king, right, to the son of Josiah. What are some of the injustices that you see here in this passage?
Extortion is one of them.
Okay,
Making your countrymen work for no wages.
okay, making your own people work for nothing.
He was building this great palace for himself, so it was all about him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, in 17, it actually says shedding innocent blood.
It sure does.
I don't know what that refers to, but
Yeah, I mean, there's some of it is vague, right? The palace is built by unrighteousness and the upper rooms by injustice, and it doesn't specifically state the injustices, but then we also see slavery happening, right? You're making people work for nothing. And it does say the shedding of innocent blood, so yeah, I agree. So what does God have to say about that situation in this passage? Maybe particularly in 11 and 12.
He says basically that he's gonna get his further on.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly like the part where he said, he'll have the burial of the donkeys dragged away and thrown outside the gates of Jerusalem.
in 19.
Yes. Yeah, you have to move on ahead. Now, he may be talking to one of his brothers there, to be fair, who have their own issues. Because he's addressing these four sons of Josiah here in Jeremiah. But yeah, he will never return. He'll die where he's captive. He won't see the land again. Woe to him. I mean, there's really no guessing what God thinks about this. So this is addressed to the son of King Josiah, right? And so it's the son Shallum who is doing all of these things. But in 15 and 16, there's a contrast with King Josiah. Can you kind of look at that and give me like a compare and contrast between King Josiah and his son?
Well, if I'm reading this right, it sounds like Josiah was a decent king,
Mm-hmm.
and his son isn't by any means.
So what do you see there that tells you that about Josiah?
He gave justice and help to the poor and needy, and everything went well with him.
Okay.
He did what was right and just.
He did what was right and just.
Apparently it was important to have cedar.
Right? Does the cedar make you more of a king? I love that.
I have this little footnote about he judged the cause of the poor and the needy. It says to know God is not merely to have peaceful feelings in your heart. To know God is to act for the benefit of others, especially for those who cannot pay you back. Those who know God love to serve Him.
And you were just right where I wanted to be, Patsy, because that's the next question I was going to ask. What do you think that phrase
I'm
means?
so
Where
smart.
you are so smart, you get the star tonight.
Did you know?
Because there is that phrase right there in verse 16. Is that not what it means to know me? And that's what I was going to ask. What do you think? What do you think that means? And I think that's exactly right. I think you may be noticing by now that a lot of these scriptures that we look at where we talk about injustice and oppression and how God feels about injustice and oppression, who is he frequently talking to?
King.
Kings. That's exactly right, Donald. Kings. So, are we...
I think the reason why he's doing that is because, to me, I mean, my opinion is the kings are supposed to be the example.
Okay.
And if they're not setting the right example, God's going to hold them accountable for that.
Okay. There's that phrase, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Kings generally possess great wealth too.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we stretching by trying to imply those instructions to kings to ourselves?
No.
Do you think it's appropriate to take that idea of if you have power or privilege of any kind,
You have influence.
if you have influence? And we've talked about that idea of advocacy. I mean, I think to some extent, right? Like, God gives the instructions to the most powerful person who has the ability to affect the most change. So there's something maybe to draw from that as well. It seems very clear in this passage in Jeremiah, though, that prospering at the sacrifice of others is not okay and is not what God desires, and that he has a very, very strong reaction to that. And maybe it's not panels of cedar in our houses.
Look at God's reaction to Pharaoh.
Right.
God
Right. I think time after time we see God disgusted when people have gain at the hands of others, and so that's kind of the idea that we're going to talk about tonight. I wanted to read a little piece to you as we kind of launch into our discussion. There's several different pieces from the book that were really good this week that I'll just kind of be sharing with you. This is from an essay by Ashley Walker. She says, today over 1 billion people are living in extreme poverty, meaning $1.25 or less per day. With most of this population working in the agricultural sector, many of the items we enjoy daily come from companies trying to keep up with the competitive market. To do this, they must continually lower their prices. This means that they continually pay the farmers and producers less and less, often cheating them out of funds they deserve. A low price at the grocery store often means someone was not paid well for his or her work. Safety considerations were lowered, the environment was treated harshly, and or communities of workers were not taken care of. Thinking about that may not sit very well with us, right? That's maybe something we don't think about very often. Did anybody, I know some of you weren't here last week, so you may not have even known this was your homework. Did anyone do the slavery footprint test? What'd you think?
72.
Oh, see, you did better than me. I have mine right up here on the screen. I had 84, and I included my family as well, so maybe my extra person got me. I don't know. That extra cell phone pushed us right over the edge. For those of you who weren't here last week, I'll direct you to, on the handout you have there right up at the top, we have like a class website, and there's a button there. There's a website it'll take you to that lets you sort of assess some of your consumer habits and consider what who might have gone into making the things that we consume. Did anybody else do the slavery footprint? I know Lainey was working with it yesterday.
Yeah,
David, you did it?
2 weeks.
Oh, that's right. You told me that. You did it last week. Nah. I know. You don't like the computer assignments. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Your number was a lot better than mine.
I think I had something like 33.
Mm-hmm.
When I first did that, 33 slaves. Hey,
That's not bad.
You've got lots of cedar in your house.
You guys came along and it's like, I'm a pauper.
Well, Jamie, David, some of those of you who did it, I know sometimes it like gave facts as you were going. Did you notice anything? Was there anything that you found surprising? Obviously, it was an imprecise. I mean,
It was the electronics. That
Yeah.
Really made, I was doing pretty well, actually. Until
Mm-hmm.
we got the cell phones, and
That's
computers,
gonna
and
be
Television.
you know, the guts of the cell phone.
Yes. In fact, let me
I
just
bought Janice
share.
one too. It was just, I should never have bought her one.
Leave Janice in the dark ages. I
It's my
know.
fault.
Moral of the story.
It's very difficult. That was one that surprised me as well, that I didn't know.
Well, the moment that I realized that, it kind of flashback to the story of the people working for Apple in China, and how it gotten so bad that, you know, they put nets around the building to catch the people that were trying to jump off the building and commit suicide.
Wow.
You didn't know about that stuff like that, though? It was pretty bad, and finally when reporters saw the nets and learned what they were for, then it got back to Apple, and Apple started demanding that they change their.
And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, is this idea of a supply chain. Technology in particular, I wanted to just kind of share some of this with you, and I learned about it when I started doing the slavery footprint test, and then I kind of dug into it a little bit. But the Democratic Republic of Congo has at least 64% of the worldwide reserves of this substance called coltan, which it goes through a whole oring process. I mean, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination and didn't care enough to dig into what all is involved. But this substance is what's is made into a highly conductive metal, basically, that's used in everything from our cell phones to our tablets to our computers to our headphones to any number of electronics that we use. And 64% of it comes from this one country. And what you have there are all of these subsistence level mines where people are working for very, very low wages, you know, just barely getting by. And here's the part that I found kind of staggering. There are 2 million or so people working in these, what they call artisanal mines. 40% of them are children, starting at the ages of like 5. Just, you know, really staggering. And then, of course, you know, that's not going straight to Apple and to Samsung and all of these other, it goes to Asia, where it's then manufactured into the things which are eventually turned into our electronics. And so the problem often happens way back in the supply chain at that raw materials level. The fashion industry is often very similar problem. You know, you may have a company that you like that wants to do things on the up and up, but they don't even know where all of their things are coming from. You know, labor, particularly in clothing collections, are often contracted out to several different things. You know, so you have cotton coming from a place and different pieces of production. And so a big American company may not even be able to trace their supply chain all the way back to its source. So these become very, very hard questions for us to ask. We can go, okay, so I'm not okay with mistreating each other. I'm not okay with this idea that my number was 84 slaves work for you. Like, I did not like the way that image looked on my computer screen at all. But the question is, what do we do with that, right? So that's what we're going to kind of try to dig into a little bit tonight, is do we know where our stuff comes from? And are we willing to ask anybody? I want to share for you just a little bit more here. I loved this essay in particular because it was so me. She says, I don't know about you, but I like to find a good deal. Often when people compliment me on what I'm wearing, I reply with thanks. And then I go into the backstory of what a great deal it was, right? Like, this is the way I was raised. And the way I have lived most of my life. So why is it then when I buy something nice that's inexpensive, I think I'm a smart shopper? Recently, I've been convicted by my cheap is better mentality. I will always want a good value, but now I pause at the point of purchase and ask questions. Why is this so cheap? I wonder if the person who made this was paid a fair wage. Our global economy has created a marketplace for cheap labor, and although slavery has been documented in nearly all types of consumable goods, good production, it is still very difficult to identify and therefore eliminate. From cars to clothes to food, every industry uses commodities tainted by slavery. So to some degree, I mean, this can be a situation that you just go, well, what do you want me to do? You know, where do we begin? What do y'all think? Have you any thoughts on this?
Sometimes when you buy, say like clothes, and doesn't mean that it has to be cheap, but you really don't know who made it until later you get home and then you notice that
Mhm.
it was made.
Made
And then
in-
you start thinking, about cheap labor and
Mhm.
Well, and I think it's also hard to know whether, was it made in a kind of slave kind of a situation?
Right.
Or was it like Noonday and it actually provided somebody a job and now they're able to eat? I mean, if it
Right.
says made in Indonesia, you really don't know whether that's a bad thing or a good thing.
It doesn't tell you enough.
No, it doesn't.
Yes.
Well, I don't think the plan of attack can be to just like stop certain industries. Like there has to be some way to go after the structure that's the problem, because ultimately people still need to be doing the work they're doing, but they need to be doing it for fair wages.
Mhm.
And so like we just stopped buying electronics as Christians all over the world, and we are still hurting people. So
Right.
it has
Well,
to be
that's-
about the
yeah.
process.
Chris and I had this conversation one night. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go to the store. And, you can go, well, I'm not going to go to X store. Well, then you get into the conversation, and we have a family member who works retail, right? So you go, okay, so you start boycotting that store. Well, my brother works there, and all he's trying to do is earn a fair wage to take care of his family,
Well, and two, we don't even have the understanding of what is a fair wage in various countries. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, you get into the economics of what business is always looking for, the cheapest way to be able to do things and
Right.
still be effective. But I was, we were in Mexico a number of years ago, and I think a lot of our mentality probably still is somewhat that way, we're simply shipping the jobs south to Mexico and whatever. We were going through, and all these places were shut down in Mexico because that's why the wages in Mexico were already too high. And therefore now they've gone on to Asia or wherever, or even lesser developed countries and
Right.
whatever, that they're.
Yeah, you never know what the ramifications are of trying to raise someone's wage. Are they going to lose their jobs because someone else will do it even less expensively? Or are they going to lose their jobs and the entire industry change because it's become too expensive to use manpower and now they're going to go with robotics? I don't know how you determine what the right wage is or what the ramifications are going to be for asking for better wages.
You ever hear though that was it the Supreme Court's decision on pornography? They said, I can't really describe it to you, but I know it when I see it.
Mhm.
The idea of that being that you can say, well, a picture of a naked lady is not necessarily pornography because you can see that in the Louvre in Paris. But when I see it, I know that's what it is. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Mhm.
It's not so much that you can say wages must be set at this dollar amount. It's about what are the conditions, what are the what are the wages, what are the living conditions of the people, what are they getting out of that, and how does that look as a whole? And then whenever you see it, probably you're going to be able to know what's fair and what's not.
You may know what's fair and what's not, but what's going to happen? That's what I'm getting at. Years and years ago, the government deregulated the airline industry. They decided, okay, we're going to do this and give everybody better service, cheaper fares, everything, help everybody move up the ladder, because only 3 airlines control this. They control it. They force you to pay whatever they want to force you to. So we did that. And look what happened. The airlines basically ate each other, cannibalized themselves, until now we're back to just a few airlines again. You never know what's, with industry, you don't know what's going to happen other than the person that can produce the best product at the lowest price at the fastest rate is going to be the one that's going to come out ahead.
I think our culture is always looking for, looking for a bargain, and I love Shark Tank. And so when I watch it, when there's somebody's manufacturing a product, the sharks will always ask them, what's your cost for producing it? And they'll say, well, we're producing it right now in Georgia and it's $1.50 a unit or whatever, but we're looking to move it over to China and we get that down to 75 cents. And so you're always seeing that
Mhm.
that seems to be just the nature of our culture. And it is kind of sad because obviously whoever's making that in Georgia is about to lose that contract. They're going to move it over to China if a shark buys into it. So
If they don't move, then they die. It's just a company, but a company is made up of people, individuals.
Yeah, but is it? But even though technology has changed over the last century dramatically, it hasn't really meant less jobs, it's just been different jobs.
Well, I guess you're right. Now,
Maybe
there are a
yes.
lot more people in service industries
Mhm.
than in
Yeah.
manufacturing.
Mhm.
Then you gotta look at use, like, for example, countries that, of course, we don't do stuff like North Korea, but those people are paid, I think the highest wage in North Korea is like $700 a month. And for them, that's wealthy. So you gotta look at, also the government of these countries. How's the government is controlling the wages? Yeah, China's cheaper, but is it because it's really cheaper over there?
Well, and I think what you run into a lot of times when we're talking about at the raw materials level, there's nobody controlling anything. There's nobody regulating anything beyond violent people who are looking to turn a profit.
I mean, like China, their wages are a lot cheaper over there. I guess that's why our companies go over there so much. We lose our jobs here.
And that, like, open trade
Yeah.
is a whole other issue because you're talking about two different issues. You're talking about, yes, China specializes in textiles or whatever, and so they can do it cheaper. But the question still remains, like, is it cheaper because they are experts at it, or is it cheaper because they're
being extorted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we see a lot of things happen that we don't anticipate, doesn't compute with us. As a college student, I worked my way through college in the summertime in a brickyard, which was just good old hard work and whatever. We had at a peak production, about 100 people that worked there. Well, then over the years, they ultimately built one, then two, and then three, for lack of a better term, automated brickyards. And so a lot of those bricks that we used to pick up, they were doing it more efficiently, from that particular perspective. But what I found interesting is, in fact, this when I was still teaching, I'd use this same illustration, ask people, now, how many folks do you suppose work at that brickyard today? And they're guessing 10, 15, whatever, when actually the employment went up to about 4 times as many. Because all of a sudden now they're saying they're making that many more bricks, and therefore now they're different.
The jobs are different.
Now, the people that are running the machinery are running much more high caliber. They need higher training, some of those kind of things. But everybody's, so it's not always, the technology sometimes gets a bad rap as well. I don't know where the happy medium is between that, among that in that situation. But
Well, I would like to propose some ways that I think as consumers might be appropriate ways for us to respond.
Just tell us the answer, please.
No, I don't have an answer. But I think that there are some things that might help. And we're not corporations, and we're not global economists. And some of these questions are maybe some of you are. I teach social studies, and economy is the one thing that I just cringe when I have to talk about, because I just pray that nobody asks too complicated a question, because we can talk about the basics of free enterprise, and then Ms. Beard is lost really quickly. But one thing I want to talk about is this idea of fair trade. Is that a term you've heard before? I brought Janice a box of fair trade coffee tonight, just because I noticed that I had it sitting in my kitchen, and I thought, we've been drinking her coffee. I'm going to take her some, since this is what we're talking about tonight. But it's this structure of selling and purchasing goods that promotes accountability, and I think that can be a really important word. That maybe we begin to ask with our dollars and ask with our voices for companies to know what their supply chain is, to be able to go back to those raw material levels and tell us where this stuff came from, and demand that their suppliers treat their workers fairly. I want to share with you a few stories, because I don't know about you. I love that quote that I think I put it on your handout, didn't I? Something to the effect of, when we start realizing that where our stuff comes from, the people who make our stuff have families and faces and personalities, that for me, that changes things, and my obsession with a good bargain changes things a little bit. So I want to share a few stories with you. I'm going to totally screw up this name. Gerardo, is that how you would say a Hispanic name like that? Gerardo? Okay, Gerardo Arias Camacho left his farm and family in the 80s because coffee prices were so low that he actually would have fallen into debt if he had tried to produce it. In his town, there was no school for his children or any form of infrastructure. He went to the United States to work for the next 10 years until he'd saved up enough funds to buy the family coffee farm from his parents. Gerardo became fair trade certified, and he can count on established prices. His farm also receives a fair trade premium, which gives him additional money that can be invested in the community. Now Gerardo has a stable farm, a scholarship program for local students, improved roads and other infrastructure within his community, and improvements on his farm. He uses fewer pesticides. His work requires little to no deforestation, and he gains energy through excess waste. This is a sustainable practice that anyone can join, but there must be a demand. Shopping for fair trade items creates demand and hope for a more sustainable and ethical world that we can all be a part of. And coffee is one of those places that, like, you can go to Walmart and you can see that it has made its way into this industry and is even reasonably affordable coffee. So that's one place where I think we're beginning to see fair trade work. And you'll notice that they also mentioned the environment. And those of you who did Daniel Plan, this is something that they talk about a little bit too, that what we put in our bodies and how we treat our bodies has to also treat the earth well. So fair trade promotes accountability, it promotes sustainability. Of course, the company that we've talked about quite a bit in here is the one that Kara works with, the Noonday Company, who basically collaborate with artisans in all of these third world countries, places like Uganda and Ethiopia and India, and particularly with female artisans for the most part, and who are unempowered in many cases in their society, and allows them to create and then connects them with first world markets to sell their work. I have this story of Sunita, who stands no more than 5'3" tall and is an amiable force to be reckoned with. Kindness exudes from every part of her small frame. Everywhere she walks in her small community of Badapur in southern New Delhi, Sunita smiles and waves to her neighbors, most of whom call to her, smile, and wave back. Her life was not always like this, however. She wasn't always strong enough to care for those around her. She was married when she was only 14 years old. She became pregnant with her first child 3 years later, but lost her baby shortly after his birth. Depressed and isolated, she says she felt numb after the baby's death. She was expected to continue having children, but not expected to do anything on her own or make any of her own decisions. Not long after the loss of her son, Sunita gave birth to her daughter, I don't know how to say her name, Vandana, and for the first time began thinking about her future. Every family wants a boy. The same was the case with my family. I was afraid for my daughter. I really wanted to do something for her in case I wasn't around in a few years. Out of a desire to make sure her daughter was provided for, she joined a local jewelry making group. The work was far from easy. Sunita was abused and never paid a fair, livable wage. Many of her work days ran late, sometimes lasting more than 9 hours. Throughout the 3 years she worked for the group, she never earned more than 40 rupees, or about 65 cents per day. Sunita eventually heard about Noonday Collection's fair trade partners. She contacted them and learned she could continue making jewelry but earn a livable wage while also taking part in the group's other educational and social programs. She quickly quit her other job and began making jewelry for the fair trade group. You can't imagine how happy I was. It was the first time I managed to do something on my own, she says. Once she began working and earning income, everything changed. Her confidence grew as she learned more about what it meant to stand up for herself. She was finally able to provide for her 2 children, as well as her in-laws and husband. Through Noonday Collection's partner group, she also learned the difference that health, education, and fair trade programs could make in her community. Suddenly, she saw that change had happened in her own life as something bigger than herself, something that could change those around her. And then the story goes on to tell about how she's sort of been a leader in her community to empower others to make similar changes. What do you think about this fair trade idea? Have you looked into it?
So how do you know if a product is a fair trade
Okay.
product?
That's tricky. And in some industries, there is fair trade certification now. So, for instance, coffee has to go through a standard of accountability to be considered fair trade certified. But yeah, that's tricky. And if you're like me, and you like a good bargain, the first thing you're going to notice when you start looking into fair trade is what? You're going to have to pay more. Yeah. So that can be frustrating as well.
I think the answer though is one that none of us like, but probably have to come to grips with at some point. That the answer is if you have to pay more for stuff, pay it and get less of it. You know what I mean? Like consume
Which,
less
yeah,
stuff.
I want to go there as well here in a few minutes. Ultimately, it comes down to dollars, right? With the companies, with us, it comes down to dollars. According to the website Made in a Free World, which is who puts together this the slave footprint thing that you did. Last year, approximately $120 million were given to address slavery, which is a pretty darn good number. But here's the problem. The profit turned from pursuits which use slavery is estimated at $150 billion. Okay? In an estimated $88 trillion spent on the procurement of goods, services, and commodities. So there's the problem, right? It is still, and that's kind of what we were identifying, right? It can be outsourced to here and here and here, and you can do it for cheaper and make more money. And so the bottom line is still companies are responding to what the market is demanding. So, I mean, what are your thoughts to that as consumers? Do we have a big enough voice as consumers? Do companies care what their consumers think?
Well, I think they did it at Walmart several years ago because of the Made in America thing. I mean, there's a big, huge push for that, and they got a lot of bad publicity for not. I guess they were advertising things were made in America, and then you got in there and things were made in China. So I do think the public cares.
Okay.
And I think it's so easy just to say, well, what difference can I make?
It is.
And yet somebody, in that case you just mentioned, somebody did something.
Well, then why did we just pick on Walmart?
Right,
Why
right.
aren't we looking at every
Right.
store? I mean, I'm not sure how that happened.
I don't
but-
know.
That's a
But
good
somebody
point.
spoke up.
And like we said before, the problem is now even made in America.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Check down
The
supply
symbol
chain.
here and all the
Yeah,
pieces
everything else
came from
comes
over
from
there.
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think the answer to this is do we have a big enough voice? Do they care what we think? Not unless our thinking is connected to action. You know, I mean, they care how we act. They care where the money is spent. They're going to continue to make cheap, unhealthy food if what we buy is cheap, unhealthy food.
Right.
Or, you know, if we buy lots of cheap clothes, they're going to keep making cheap clothes. And if we buy the free trade certified stuff, they're going to start
Right.
stocking
And-
free trade certified stuff.
Right. And I think coffee in particular maybe started making that jump maybe quicker than some markets because of the organic push and the environmental issues and people's health concerns about what all was going into the production of coffee, that's where that demand came from, that it's happened kind of quickly and not quickly, but it has happened at least. So when it comes to this fair trade thing, you know, I don't know where you stand. If you can afford to pay it, my advice is to pay it. Can we promote companies that do these good things, right? Like, I am not a person who spends $25 on bracelets and earrings. Like, I love what Kara does. Not really my deal. Like, I bought 2 pieces, and, you know, that's more than I generally spend on jewelry. But you know what? I know women who spend lots of money on jewelry. So when my friends are talking about a Stella and Dot party, why don't I just say, you know, you like that? Let me tell you about. Let me tell you about these people who have made the effort to make beautiful things just like that, and they've looked to see where it comes from, and here's some of the problems that they're solving. You know, you like your Vera Bradley bag, let me show you these beautiful bags that are made by these women who are recovering from horrible situations. So I don't know, maybe that's part of it is to be educated about companies who are doing it right, and at least to maybe kind of cheer them on where we can, at whatever level we can.
It worked the other morning at Sortino's because I wore the scarf, the infinity scarf that I bought from Kara, and the lady serving my coffee. She said, I love your scarf. Where did you get that? So I was able to tell her about noonday while she's making my coffee.
Right.
So it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the conversation we get to engage in, whether anybody's buying anything or not. But I do think speaking up can be powerful as well. Let me read you just a little bit more. I was going to say this is the last time I was going to read to you, but it's not. It's important that companies hear from their customers. Without that input, many will continue to make decisions based only upon their bottom line. We, the consumers, are the last link in the supply chain. So, I mean, I think there's that level of accountability, right? There is a supply chain, and we are at the top of the food chain. Therefore, we have considerable power. By speaking in one voice, consumers can bring enough pressure to bear to remove the slavery ingredient from the things we buy, writes Kevin Bales, president of Free the Slaves. As consumers, we can begin to ask our favorite companies what they are doing to be part of the solution in building a slave-free economy. And I think maybe that's part of it, is just to begin to voice those concerns to the companies we like. Maybe not to organize these malicious boycotts that end up hurting my brother who works at Walmart or whatever it might be. I didn't mean to say a company name.
That is where it works.
That is where he works, and if you know me, you already knew that anyway. But maybe we begin to tell the companies that listen to, companies spend billions of dollars on advertising and surveys and finding out what consumers care about. So, maybe it's time for us to organize voices and say, look, we care about these things. If you did the slavery footprint, or if you didn't, I would highly encourage you to do so. But one of the options it gives you at the end is the ability to, and they've done all the hard work for you, right? Like they've written a letter and they're basically just asking you to lend your email address to their, but they'll let you, okay, so clothing was one of the issues of your score, right? And they'll just randomly select maybe 20 major clothing companies, and you can check on them and you can use your email address, and basically they kind of got a letter that they've already written for us. So, there are some things that are not even that hard to do to put your voice in there.
I think you're right though, that Lindy said, it's gotta be the research, and then if it's something as simple as just where the money goes, if it's the organic thing, that's become a movement.
Right.
Because Walmart saw a market for that, that's why they started selling that stuff. And so I think that's probably more people that are aware of that and at least choose. If you have a choice, at the very beginning, that's the only thing you can do. Is you have a choice between the $3 t-shirt that's who knows where and a $10 t-shirt that's fair trade, then just make that choice. I think that makes a lot of sense.
You buy one t-shirt instead of 3.
Yeah.
Right, which is exactly, that's the next thing I wanted to say, is sometimes it's just a simplicity. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of on the same lines, but I don't know how many years back it's been, but Target refused to let the Salvation Army go to out in front of their doors. And to me, I had a different view of that store after that. I thought, I've never heard of such.
Mm-hmm.
Why would that change your mind about wanting to go there? Because maybe nobody paid attention to it, but it bothered me.
Well, but one of the, and I'm not totally disagreeing there, but one of the things we do run into is the process. Okay, we just take Target here, and we're not gonna let you do this. How many other requests do they have, maybe from groups that we wouldn't have been as happy to have them out there ringing their bell? That solve that problem, by the way. That's just,
Right.
You don't know. It just bothered me.
yeah. No, I understand.
But it might be an
Crazy.
example of the value of voices being,
Hopefully Walmart,
speaking
because I see
voices,
people
that
out
there,
front.
probably that was that company was reacting to some voices being heard. Now, maybe our voices would say something different, but if our voices weren't saying anything and somebody else's were, that may be proof of exactly what we're talking about here in terms of advocacy.
And I'll tell you guys what I tell my mom. You gotta get your information from someplace other than Facebook. I mean, that's a good place to get some things out there, but, it's
Then I noticed that.
because, what you might see there is that, I don't know, but Target may have not, let the dinglings out front like they normally do. That's what I call them, by the way. But what they may have done is maybe they had made up for it by corporately donating X amount of dollars that you didn't know about, you know, it's
Well,
just,
maybe they should have said that.
Yeah,
yeah, it-
What
well,
was on the news?
Maybe they did.
right.
I think it goes back to
But that's
the,
still kind
maybe
of
the research, because like you told me,
Right.
you buy one fair trade t-shirt, still 3, but it's kinda like on the coltan or whatever it is. I mean, you might really do a lot of research and find a cell phone that's actually manufactured in America, but you would have had no idea that the components.
Right,
were
this little piece of metal.
placed in
it is
Congo.
overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, you'll never know that.
And so, yeah, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I saw the reverse of it. I've got a very good friend. She's a visiting professor from China in our school, and we became very good friends. And she wanted to go shopping. Well, she wanted to take home some
American things.
American things. We shopped forever and couldn't find them. However, she bought lots of things because it was such a bargain over the very same brand, the very same model type, everything, but it was less than half here what she paid for it in
So you
China.
can't really
So
go with
she-
the wages with the lower cost of living,
Yeah.
because that's not the truth everywhere.
Wow.
It's not, they're getting paid less because things cost less. It's
If you
not.
hang out at the gallery in Houston, I can't tell you how many languages you
You'll
will
hear.
hear because people fly in to shop at
Yes.
the Galleria and take it back to Japan or wherever they're going.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
amazing
Yeah.
the number of different cultures that are walking around to that mall.
But it's a bargain for them.
It is a bargain.
Hey, since we're off the rails a little bit, there was something there's an organization called Kiva.org, Kiva.org, that I completely forgot about until now. And what it is, I had a friend up in Chicago who had a baby, and what he did is he said, we had a baby, and when 10 people, and we knew it was gonna be a boy, when 10 people donate $25 or loan $25 to this organization, we'll reveal to them the weight and length and all that kind of thing. And then he said, then we get 10 more, we'll tell you the name. If we get 10, so whatever, I donated $25. What it is that it's micro loans. So my $25 went towards, I think, $1,500 to a guy somewhere in Central America, and it told you exactly what it was for. It was for seed and cultivating equipment, and he was going to just plant a crop and make all of his loan back plus some. And then what would happen is he would pay back the loan to the organization. They would give you your money back. You could cash it out, or you could do it with somebody else. And this is, I mean, there are literally thousands of people across the world that just need $2,000 to basically set up their business or their farm or and it's not just farm, it's all kinds of stuff. But it's just another one of those ways that these are people who are in poverty. There's no way they can do this on their own. They can't go to a bank and get a loan. They can't.
Was it legit though?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's highly
I've
rated.
read an article of at least one other organization that's doing something like that, and the cool thing about it is that there is the accountability, that they are setting up a business plan with somebody who has some business experience. My dad took a crew of young business students several years ago to do a little of that kind of stuff, training business model with people who need to be able to support themselves. So, yeah.
Well, that group that we went with is called Torchbearers, and it's a mission group, and basically Chris described what they do is short-term financing, and then but the requirements on that is that put together a group that's going to do something for their village, basically. That will be, and then as they get better, then one way or the other, it'll either be then they pay back. And they don't always have to be a loan situation just to support to get them started. But the idea then is that it becomes a self-supporting.
That was an effort.
This is in Cameroon, as far as where this group has done that work, and I've been on their board of directors for about 10 years. And you can see the things that are progressing from that. First off, with these, they call them torches, and they're all prayer-based and whatever. It's a Christian-based organization that's doing that, so they're seeing the soul saved as well as simply commerce being expanded.
That's a
Do that,
system
but
Yes.
as it's grown, in many of these villages, and lots of them haven't come very far either, as you might expect, but in many villages, that oh, what could we do if we just had electricity? And so that,
Right.
now Torchburg has branched out, and they've got more money than we've ever got from any one group that is supplying ways for electricity, basically, out in the country.
Mhm.
And of course, as they're getting access to electricity, the speed at which they are able to put these things together and improve the living conditions and simply philosophy of life and so those are good things. Is there any corruption in any of that? I'm sure there is. Government in general is there.
Right.
That has lots of problems with it. But that's a good example. That's just an example of what you're talking about.
And all of these things, be it Noonday, be it Kiva, be it this, be it whatever, active water, all these things are out there. We just don't know about it. And part of it's just because we don't care to know about it.
Right.
Sorry.
So to synthesize, I mean, we've thrown a lot of things around today, and I think you have awesome thoughts. There's some actions we can take. I think that even though the problem seems really big, there's some things we can do. Maybe we're these small places where individual impact can be made. Maybe those are great places to connect. Even though they do seem small. I'm kind of thinking back to, was it a week or two ago that Chris gave the starfish story, right? Like, you're still making a difference to somebody, and that's bigger than what I'm doing right now. Right, so that's good. I think that if we are using our voices with big companies, I at least am not really advocating some kind of a malicious boycott or cutting off of all consumption or anything like that. So much as let's just start to ask for some accountability, to say it matters to us where this stuff came from, what field did it start in, and how were people treated, and tell us that story. And where we can, let's support the people who are already doing that. I do think there's something too, and I heard several of you say it. I think Janice said it, and I heard Carolyn say it. But this simplicity idea too. You go back to what you heard in Jeremiah. Does all this cedar make you a king? How much do you really need? And just to ask ourselves those tough questions in the grocery store. My girls are here, and we went to the mall yesterday, and I found myself walking through the mall with different eyes and asking myself, why is that tank top $2? And am I okay with, and the bottom line is when a company marks something down and they're taking, you're getting your great bargain, it is not generally because that company is taking a big loss. And so, take those for what you will. And I think, too, just having these conversations, naturally having these conversations with whomever it is that we might have influence with. Not very many people are aware of these, right? Like, I took that slavery footprint thing, and then I had conversations about it all week long because it completely wigged me out. And I was like, you've got to take this and see what you think about this. I think
You're not saying, like, if a store has a sale on something just because they want, like, I'll use Bell's, for example. Bell's has a lot of sales all the time. And, if you're on their email list or their phone list, or they call you and say, we're having our one-day sale, and everything's half off. Are you saying that if it's half off, you should really think about it?
I think, Donald, that if
just ask yourself some hard questions.
I think that if you don't think they're making money with half off, you're fooling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
reason they have those one-day sales all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're still making money.
they're still making money.
Yeah. I mean, like, just because somebody.
So if that's the company you like, I'm not saying don't shop there or don't shop their sales, but maybe they should hear from us.
Yeah.
I like to shop there, but I sure would like to know where your stuff comes from.
Well, I think, if I'm remembering from my business classes, people know, I think retail is like, clothing is like at least a minimum of a 3-time the cost markup.
Right.
So when they mark it half down, they're still making,
Right.
they're still making money. So, and it's one of the places where they make the most is on clothing, and the markup value on other things, but.
So for many of those stores, that's just their pricing strategy. It really
Right.
is, they're not necessarily sales, that just makes it an attractive way to find out this is how much it costs. I always teach my sister-in-law, so she go to Kohl's and then, you know, they always tell you how much you saved when you and whatever. So she had her mind that that was real money that she was saving as opposed to that sympathy. You go next week and it'll be a different thing.
Right.
It's gonna come out about the same.
Say $40 and here's a $10 coupon to come back next week.
Yeah. You say 40 more.
What's that, Nancy?
And the clothing industry is one of the least tracked, and a lot of American companies really don't know their supply chain. So, you know, if nothing else, if we can raise the level of conversation where we begin to ask those questions and ask other people to ask those questions, maybe we are making an impact. Not to cut anybody off, but this has been a very interesting conversation. And I don't know about you, this for me has probably been the piece that I've wrestled with the most, just in terms of like, what does this mean to my daily activity and habits, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it a little bit. I think it's difficult, but also important. We only have 2 sessions left. We'll meet next week, even though it is the anniversary week. I think we're okay to meet in the evening. That'll allow us to take Easter Sunday off, and then we'll finish up on that last week after Easter, and we will meet at the church that night. David and Janice are out gallivanting around that weekend, so we're being evicted from our host home that evening. They did tell me though that if they happen to make it back into town on time, they will still join us for the conversation. So you do have a little bit of homework for next week. We're going to talk about oh no, not gallivanting. We'll talk about creation next week. So you have part 3 of your action plan, or if you're behind on your action plan, or you've lost your action plan, I have a few copies left there. You're welcome to grab one of those. But we are ready for part 3 of that. And at any point, if you've come across something that you're just like really excited about, by all means, bring that back and tell us what it is you've decided to do, and we'll celebrate and maybe even hold you accountable to that action. So, would somebody pray for us before we leave tonight? Or if not, I will.
I'll pray. God, we thank you for this time, and we pray, Lord, you'll just help us to be informed. Help us to see truth through your eyes, and help us to realize that behind everything we buy, there are a series of faces of people that you care about and love, and that you want to be treated in a way that reflects your love for us and for one another. So, Lord, I pray you'll help us to think twice and to really consider the impact of what we're doing, and let us wake up from our slumber as we live in a very consumer-oriented, selfish-driven society, and just pray that you'll again shake us out of that and help us to keep one another accountable, and help us to find things that we can do that will bring glory to you by helping others in this way. And we pray all this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Yeah, good.
Out of the way.